You're not crazy and you're not the worst. Whatever you're dealing with, there is always a reason. Always. Okay? That reason is often fear-based, okay? Because we're all designed to continue the species by avoiding dangerous things. It's just that when we are traumatized or we're dealing with a lot of emotional stuff, just about anything and everything can feel dangerous.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and today we've got Jennifer Schrappe. I said it right, didn't I? Perfect. Okay. I'll read you her bio real quick and then we'll get into the topic, which is going to be very, very interesting. So, Jennifer is a licensed professional clinical counselor and supervisor with over 20 years' experience. With a heart rooted in serving others, she specializes in issues of trauma and emotional woundedness. In addition to individual therapy, providing workshops and sharing insights um, via speaking engagements are near to her heart. Jennifer strives to be a light to many people through many avenues. I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
Well, welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for being here, and and our topic today is interesting. It's going to be how trauma can affect all parts of your life. So we're going to talk about the different parts of our life where trauma affects us. And so thank you for being here and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, first of all, Lisa, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and to illuminate this subject that can keep people so stuck and so in pain. But before I launch into all of that, a bit more about me. Well, I am in Columbus, Ohio, and I am also a mom of three kids from the ages of 9 to almost 19. And I have been in the field of therapy, like you said, for over 20 years. Really got into it as a way of helping others to not deal with half of the stuff that I had to work to overcome
That's so
in
common.
my
That's
own
so
life,
common with the
right?
therapist. I love
Right?
that.
And not that I have arrived, but I certainly have a lot more self compassion and understanding than I used to back in my 20s.
Yeah.
And additionally, I'm also a pastor and looking to serve people in that way. Again, first, all about love and compassion, not any of the ugly stuff that people who call themselves Christians are doing in the world these days.
Yeah.
But that's another soapbox.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We could have a long
my main
conversation about that.
we totally could. So basically, what drives me is helping other people, not just helping other people, but helping other people to understand that what they have going on, there are always valid reasons why they do and say what they do
Thank
and
you.
say. They are not crazy. They are not the worst. They might be doing some crazy looking things. They might be thinking some crazy sounding things, but there are always reasons. And sometimes they're aware of what's going on, oftentimes they're not.
Mhm.
And so we get in there and we examine what's going on with the person's emotional system, and we help the person to have more clarity, but then also to have hope and to have more self compassion. People who genuinely are suffering often do not have a whole lot of self compassion. And
Yeah.
that just adds another, big stick that they're whacking themselves with in the midst of all the suffering.
That is so true. And what you were saying is so true. We were kind of talking about it before we started recording that, the thing that used to get to me is I did so much of my healing by myself. And so it was a very slow process, as you could imagine. And the thing that I struggled so much with for so long was my behavior, right? And just thinking that I was crazy and the things that I thought and the things that I said and then my behavior. And, had someone come along and said, no, 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 you're not crazy. You're doing this for a reason. Here's why. And, I'll tell you, education is just one of our superpowers, and learning so much about trauma and what it does to us has been huge in my healing because it really separates me from my behavior, that crazy behavior I used to do, and the thoughts and everything. It really separates me and gave me an opportunity to just react different.
Mm, yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I love this. So I do have some questions for you. I really like these questions. I think they're going to be really great for our listeners, and so I'm excited about them. So, in what ways can unresolved trauma shape a person's beliefs about themselves, their relationships, and the world around them?
Oh gosh, unresolved trauma will just color all of that.
Hmm.
It'll just color all of that. And the biggest emotional component, of course, would be fear. So with trauma, people get hurt and they are taught to fear more, to fear others more, to fear themselves more, to fear circumstances more, to, for example, walking down the street and hearing a loud noise, somebody who has unresolved trauma that can have a completely devastating reaction versus another person might just jump and be like, oh, well, that was weird, and then move on with the day. But with unresolved trauma, that's often, so often not the case. And as far as relationships, there can be this huge need to self protect, which then will keep a person very closed, very subdued. There can be, conversely, a very strong response that just easily goes from 0 to 100. So there's, this, from 0 to freak out or
Yes.
0 to lashing out.
Yeah.
So
From,
there can
yeah,
be
in a
that.
flash, in a flash.
In a flash, yeah, before the person is even fully aware
Yeah.
of what's going on. And there can be, of course, physical components where the individual may not be cognitively or even emotionally aware of the effects of trauma, but there are like aches and pains,
Hmm.
or there's tightness or development of some chronic condition, and it's tied back to the trauma. So those are just a few examples, but the biggest way to describe that would be to say that it distorts, it colors
Hmm.
everything. It touches everything, as of course it would, because trauma is a threat to an individual. And maybe that's a safety threat. Maybe it's a threat against that person's worth and value or ability to make choices with freedom. But it's a threat of some kind, and even after that threat has ceased, the person will still, we like what we're used to. And
Yeah.
we like to continue the patterns that we have been following for a long, long time. And so a person who's been traumatized may not be aware that, oh, well, I have the freedom to choose to wear the white socks instead of the black socks today. Like I can do that today. That's kind of like news to me,
Yeah.
and it's blowing my mind, but I can do that. Or hey, I'm allowed to drive myself to the store, or I'm allowed to have an opinion that is different and to voice that from the person who's sitting in front of me right now. Whereas in the past, that would have been a big, big problem, even a safety issue for me. So it's this very restrictive way, fear based way
Hmm.
of living, and it will touch every area of life.
I kind of describe it, it's like we have filters over our eyes of, from the trauma that helps us see things different. So yeah, it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect everything that we see, we hear, and yeah, and deeply affect our relationships. Because I can remember, before I was aware of my triggers, and I can go back and think about those times when I would get triggered, and I would be going from calm to just over the top. And I describe it as like it completely fills every part of my being in a flash. It just completely fills me, and then I just react. And I react from that state, which is very damaging for me and for anybody around,
Mm.
right? Hey, thank you for listening so far. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you won't ever miss an episode.
Mhm.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating, and then when you're looking at the person across from you and watching their response to you because they're looking at you like, "Whoa, this is, over the top," which would then just spiral me even more, right? Because then I
Mhm.
realize, "Okay,
Yeah.
I'm over the top here, but I'm so far gone, I don't know how to pull it back in," right?
Then you have 2 problems. You've got your own distress, and then you've got the person across from you who's like, "Whoa, what is happening right now?" Yeah.
It's yeah, it's really that would I just remember that was it was bad enough that I would lose, and go over the top, but then just what I did to the person across from me, I hated that. I just hated that, and I just felt so out of control. Thank God I'm over that. I'm not completely healed, but whew, I have learned to manage that because that's not I don't like cleaning up my messes. I really don't. I prefer not to
Mm,
make
mhm.
messes.
Prefer not to make the mess.
I prefer not to make the mess. So that's why I've worked so hard on my healing. Okay, so our next question is, how does trauma impact the body and nervous system? And what are some signs that past trauma is still affecting daily life?
Alright, so how does trauma affect the body and nervous system? So, trauma will a way that another clinician stated it, which has stuck with me, is like there's the cognitive way of processing things, with our thoughts, and then there are the emotions that we feel, but there's like this third pathway for trauma, and we're not going to feel it emotionally. We're not going to be aware that it's there, but the body will hold on to it. The body will be hit by it, and it can cause issues with muscles and issues with ligaments and with just little aches and pains here and there.
Mhm.
And it can certainly affect energy
Oh,
levels.
for sure.
And it can, again, it can result in the development of some chronic situations with health. And what I've noticed in my clients, I had a young woman years ago who, very fit, very healthy appearing, and I believe she was even like an active athlete, and she was complaining of this like crick in her shoulder blade, like in the back, like around the middle of her back, there was this pain and it didn't make any sense to her. And so I said, "Well, let's examine it emotionally and see if there's something there that your body's holding on to." And it's sort of, it's sort of a 50-50. There could be something there, there could be nothing there. And we started just having her sit with it, and a memory popped up. A memory where she was hurt by something. And so we do our work on that memory and bring it to resolution, bring it to peace, and that pain disappeared. And that, as you can see, was completely fascinating to me as a clinician,
Mhm.
still sticks with me. And when I have clients who come to me who are like, I've had this issue or that issue with my health and my doctor can't find anything, I'll say, "All right, let's see if there's some emotional stuff connected to that. I'm not saying that there is, or let's see if there's some stress connected with that. Let's just sit with that and kind of examine it. And I would say almost every single time we have found something. Additionally, I see a lot of injured workers.
Mhm.
People have been hurt on the job and they're dealing by the time that they get to me, they've already had their case for their physical injuries, and then over time there have been emotional things that have developed as well, and so they're referred to me. And I find that, of course, wrapped up in what they're dealing with physically, there are emotional components as well, and we work on those, and the physical will start to improve. Or maybe there's like nothing emotional that's showing up, it's just purely physical. But as we're just exploring the current stressors, let's say somebody shows up to session with a headache, and we're talking about, what's on that person's mind, then that headache starts to improve. Not always, but I have seen it plenty of times. And so those
Mhm.
are ways where, in my experience, those are ways that I've seen the body hold on to things and let the person know, hey, something here is not okay. Something here needs to be processed. And then your second question, tell me what your second
The
question
second
is
question is,
again.
and what are some signs that the past trauma is still affecting daily life?
Mm. So anything, really anything that is out of the norm, that keeps happening and it doesn't make sense and it can't be attributed to a present day factor, and it's not, if the person has gone to a medical professional, there's not clarity on the medical professional's part as to what is going on, we can look at that,
Mhm.
and we can again have the client just sit with curiosity and openness and be aware, be conscious of whatever that malady is, and see what comes to the forefront of the mind. And in fact, one time I heard of this really fascinating report, and it was the story that was shared was that there was this man who, in his there was a devastating experience that happened to his family, and there was a legal process connected to that. And in the legal process, he had to listen to a member of his family be accused and just taken down, taken down, taken down, and he was not allowed to testify. So it was like he was swallowing all of this garbage.
Mhm.
And he, not too long after that, developed stomach cancer. And there was no family history. And his wife, who was then relaying this story, was tying it to, now again, this is secondhand, but I find this fascinating. And I wonder if there had been the level of understanding back when this happened, the level of understanding that we now are gaining about how the body holds on to things,
Mhm.
then I wonder what kind of treatment he could have had that could potentially have saved him.
Exactly.
Also, one of my interns has been offering a workshop about the mind body connection that very much addresses
Mhm.
this thing, and just how the body will reveal in different ways stuff that needs to be released, understood,
Yeah.
processed, respected.
Released.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. And in my experience, men are going to process things much more physically than women.
True, and you know what's interesting is and I know so many survivors who deal with, like, stomach issues, that's a real common one, or they have an autoimmune disease, which is I know that that's also tied to, can be tied to trauma as well. For me, and you were kinda touching on it a few minutes ago, mine was physical. I've had so many tears and damage to my upper part of my body, which is interesting, and my lower back, which is interesting. And I used to joke, I don't joke about it now because it was kind of true, is that I felt like I always carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. And so I've
Mm,
had shoulder surgeries. I've had a lot, and it's not because I'm not surgery happy at all. I didn't want any of them, but I I did enough damage that it was significantly affecting my life. But I find that really interesting, and what I remembered, and this is only probably in the last 5 years that I finally put this together, but when I was, married to my first husband, um, he would call me, and I would literally be sitting next to the phone, and I would pick it up, and he'd say, "Gosh, did you just run to the phone?" And I said, "No, why?" And he said, "You're breathing so hard. Like, you sound like you're wounded, or not wounded, but you're breathing hard." And he said that a few times, and I didn't understand what it was. Well, I when I look back on it, I walked around so tense all the time because I was full on in survival mode. So I walked around so tense all the time, and I wasn't breathing. I was breathing very shallow. I recognize that now. And so, and then I was very active. So imagine someone who's walking around so tense all the time, and then she's constantly going to the gym. She's constantly active, constantly doing stuff. Well, of course I'm going to damage myself.
mm, yeah,
But I wholeheartedly believe in the connection.
yeah.
Unfortunately.
You've lived it, huh?
I've lived it. And I know, and I've read several books about, on therapists that have talked about this. And I know that there's a way in some cases to even overcome some of this. And my husband's actually one of them that kind of did. He overcame rheumatoid arthritis. It's completely been in remission for well over 20 years.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was so bad at one point, they were talking about you either do chemotherapy or we cut your fingers off. Like, it was really bad. But it's been in
Wow.
remission for well over 20 years, and he's, you know, doing fantastic. So I find it just fascinating. And I know as we're learning more and more about the effects of trauma, I mean, I think we're really kind of just scratching the surface of what we're finding out about the effects of trauma and how it affects our bodies and our mind and all the nuances with it. It's just I find it fascinating.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess the reason why I find it fascinating is because we can now find the connection and we can overcome so much of it now. We don't have to live with that. We don't have to live with that the rest of our life, right? Hey, if you're ready to go deeper in your healing journey, join our 6-week workshop. Sign up today at women's childhood abuse healing workshop.com or click on the link below. I'd love to see you there and help you on your healing journey. Okay, so our next question is, what are some common ways people unknowingly adapt to trauma, and how can these coping mechanisms sometimes create new challenges?
Unknowingly adapt to trauma. Well, depression is a big one. Not that
Mm,
that is something a person chooses, but depression, which so often is maligned as laziness, come on, just get up and get out there.
get
Don't
over
sit
it.
at home or get over it, right? Depression is actually a self-protective, self-preserving response.
Really?
Depression, yes, it is. Depression is typically a response to being chronically stressed and or chronically overwhelmed by whatever, and that can trigger this depression part of the emotional system to come along and kind of tamp everything down. Here, you just get into your hole and I'll cover you up. And it often shows up as all this grayness, like a cloud,
Yeah.
and it does mute everything. It'd be great if it only muted the stress and overwhelm and anxiety that often is co-occurring, but it'll just tamp down everything and gray up everything, because to feel gray and diminished is certainly better than to be keyed up, stressed, freaking out, or any of those extremes. So when somebody comes in and they're dealing with depression, I wonder what's been overwhelming this person? What's been stressing this individual out so much that the emotional system has a need to just shut everything down before the stress takes the individual completely out?
I've never heard it explained like that, and it makes complete sense. So it's almost like a coping mechanism for our body. It's
Yes,
a protective coping mechanism for our body. So we can't have you all hyped up and jacked up all the time. So we got to mute you. But unfortunately, that muting, like you said, affects everything in their world.
everything. Everything. Yeah,
That,
depression it's often misunderstood.
oh, yeah.
It's often misunderstood. And again, it's not something that a person is going to choose, like, oh, I'm going to choose to live in this gray cloud for the rest of my days. No, but it's often something that the person's emotional system, which again is all about self protection, self preservation. And when I work with clients, that's what I'm doing. I'm working with their emotional systems and teaching them that every emotion is a part of the system. And you can think of them like little people running around inside, and they all have their purposes.
Hmm.
And their purpose is to keep bad things from happening.
Right.
But they
Protect you.
go about it in so many different ways.
Yeah. Our body is smart, but dumb too.
Yes, yes. So that's a big coping mechanism. And then of course you have any of the things that would numb out. So any addiction
Hmm.
will bring relief. I would say instant relief when the person is really engaging in that addiction. And that certainly, in those first few moments, feels tons better than what the trauma will feel like. Myself, a big part of my story is a lifelong battle with food addiction.
Hmm.
And it's still something that's very much in process, and that food addiction is there to help me when I am wanting to put myself out there with the different career endeavors that I'm pursuing. This food addiction part is like, that's kind of uncomfortable. How about instead you eat? And I'm like, oh, that does sound a lot better.
Yep. 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 Been there. Yep. Yep. Hmm. Yep.
That certainly would be a lot more comfortable. I know what that is.
Right.
But this other stuff, I put myself out here and I put myself out there, and what if nothing happens, or, I just get discouraged? Well, I can't have that. But this I know that this has been my friend for decades and decades,
Hmm.
and we like what we're comfortable with. So addiction is a common coping mechanism. Trying to control everything is a very common coping mechanism. Again, self-protection, self-preservation. If I can control everything, I can keep any more bad stuff from happening.
And we get these coping
And it's
mechanisms when we're in the trauma, right? And it's what got us through at the moment. And our little minds go, "Oh, that worked. Note to self, save that back there." And then we take it into our adult life, and it doesn't work anymore.
yeah, it works to an extent in the real time of the trauma, and then afterwards it stops working, and we're like, wait, what?
I'm
Why did that
confused.
stop working? That's not okay. But I think I'll try it about 53 more times, because certainly one of these times it'll start working again.
That's so true. It's so true. God, the crazy things that we do, and it's so true. It's so true.
Ah,
But
yes,
I can and
yes,
I can
yes,
relate because
yes.
the projects I've got going on too, it does get it do it's it I go through all those emotions too, and I'll catch myself wandering out into the kitchen. "Hmm, I'm hungry." "No, really? Really? Are you really hungry? Are you just trying
What are you
to
avoiding
fill
right now?
something?" And sometimes I just feel something. I just do.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
it's a
That's
process though.
right.
That's the biggest part, is it's a process, and I feel like I'll be on my healing journey till I take my last breath. But It does get easier. It does get easier than when you start.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank goodness.
And so I remind me again what your second
Oh,
question
the
was.
second question, oh, okay. And how can these coping mechanisms sometimes create new challenges?
Ah,
The
yes,
challenges.
indeed. Yeah, so we've started talking about that. They will create new challenges by causing new difficulties to deal with. So in the case of depression, all right, so I'm traumatized and stressed out and anxious from that stuff that happened, and I have this additional issue of depression. Okay, so that's like a double layer of suckiness,
Mhm.
and now I need even more help than I used to need, or I was I thought I was getting past my traumatic past, but now I have developed this skin picking disorder where I can't stop picking at spots on my skin. And so now I've got that. And where did that come from? And I can't stop. It's so soothing when I pick at my skin like that. Or again, if there's some kind of compulsive, maybe it's not even in full on addiction, but some just any kind of compulsive behavior that will help the person to feel like he or she has a measure of control over life, which can be highly misleading. So maybe that's excess shopping. Maybe it's like excessively checking on loved ones. And if, the person doesn't answer the phone or doesn't answer a text within a reasonable amount of time, then those fears go from 0 to
Mhm.
100. Anything that is adding to the stress, anything that is causing more confusion, causing more of a challenge in life, those things can be thought of as potentially related to the trauma, and trying to get the person out of the mess and the pain and the confusion of trauma, but then just landing in a different pot of hot water.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions about this episode or really anything that has to do with trauma. So you can comment below or you can reach out to me at asklisatickle@gmail.com. I'd really looking forward to hearing from you. Just another thing to try to cope with their trauma.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm, 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 mm. There's a lot of challenges with our trauma, but okay, so how can unhealed trauma influence decision making, career choices, and the ability to trust oneself and others?
Complete fear response.
Hmm. There's a lot of
The
fear with
fear,
trauma, a lot of fear. It's almost like it's
as
a,
there needs to be. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's just so much trauma, just so much fear in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we take it to a highly uncommon example, if a person is hit by a train and recovers somehow, uh, further experiences of trains are going to have a certain kind of response.
Yeah.
Understandably so. Even if the person stays 50 to 100 feet away from that train, the body's like, oh, train equals danger. Train danger, train danger. Now, a process called rapid resolution therapy can neutralize that to a great extent, but that response, first of all, just being aware of that response
Hmm.
and understanding that it is self protective. That way, the person doesn't have to feel any more crazy than usual. That will help a lot. And trauma will cause a variety of fears, fears that we may perfectly understand and fears that we may not, but we're still reacting to them, and they're still coloring the way that we make decisions, the way that we relate to others, the way that we relate to ourselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it comes back to fear.
'Cause it's stored in our body and it's stored in our subconscious, and so when it's unhealed and something triggers it, and that's what's so frustrating with the trauma is that you get triggered and you're reacting and your body's reacting and you're just like going along for the show. That's how it feels like, until you work through that. But those triggers, man, they can come from nowhere too. Like for
Mhm.
me, and I know this to be true, and I don't know if I'll ever necessarily work through it, and it's not that important to me. But for instance, going to a car garage, especially a tire, because it's so loud, right? They use those machines and it pops and it's loud. And even though I know I'm safe, it's fine. I am so unnerved when I'm there, and I know where it came from, and it came from when my brother used to work on his car in the garage, and he used to freak out because something would happen, and he would get angry, and tools would go flying, and the screaming and all the noise. And so, but it's interesting because I haven't worked through that where I don't get affected by it, but I know where it's coming from, and I just either avoid it or just do my deep breathing. But isn't that interesting after all these years, and I know where it's rooted in, but just like if there's a lot of loud, voices, a lot of even if somebody's yelling, but they're not angry, at times that can kinda trigger me, and again, it's the same thing, and it's but I'm aware of it, and that's where our self-awareness is so important, right?
Yeah, trauma can just take us right back.
What are some steps individuals can take to recognize and break free from trauma-driven patterns in different areas of their life?
That's a great question. And depending on the person's comfort level with, I'll say, doing the work needed to become free, the individual may be more comfortable, first of all, learning more.
Yeah.
Maybe watching a video from hopefully a reputable source. Maybe reading The Body Keeps the Score,
Yeah.
or some other book from a person who knows what they are talking about. Plenty of misinformation out there for sure.
Mhm.
Personally, I love IFS therapy, internal family systems therapy, and there are plenty of resources that the IFS people put out. Richard Schwartz is the one who developed it. He has plenty of resources out there. Jay Early also has put a lot of resources out there too.
Okay.
So there's a lot. So, first of all, growing and understanding of what trauma is and how it can affect people, those are huge and they can be very freeing in and of themselves. And then certainly working with a therapist who knows trauma
Mhm.
and has effective interventions for trauma. Trauma focused groups. Again, not for group therapy isn't for everybody, but when we have a good candidate for group therapy can just
Yeah.
make things tons better because I'm not alone in what I've got going on. I'm
Exactly.
not the only crazy person
Yep.
here, although I have yet to meet a crazy person in this line of work. And then we're doing this journey together. Art therapy
Mhm.
specifically can be great in accessing. We have an art therapist at my practice, and I've seen how she will help clients to access parts of themselves that talk therapy would not have readily been able to access. It's fascinating.
Mhm.
It's fascinating. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially with the trauma therapy, and I've mentioned it so many times on my podcast that it's really important that we do see a trauma therapist, someone who specializes in trauma, because our therapy is different than just regular talk therapy, and there's modalities that will help us. There's definitely a place for talk therapy. I'm not downplaying that, but when it comes to our trauma, we need experts that understand it and help us work through it. So definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And then earlier in our time here, I referenced rapid resolution
Mhm.
therapy. And if it's all right, I'd like to talk a bit
Sure.
about that. Cool. So, rapid resolution therapy deals with specific traumatic memories. Okay. So, a one time thing. And if the trauma is something that happened over a longer course of time, then using this intervention that I'm going to describe, we would need to hit on like the key memories that keep popping up, and that will go far in essentially neutralizing the whole lot. But this is how it works. Rapid resolution therapy will basically take the sting, take the anxiety, take pretty much the crux of the trauma response out of a memory by neutralizing it. And the way that we do it is, let's say it's a memory of I'll be a little bit silly again, not a regular example, but being hit by a train, okay? So this memory of being hit by a train and the person keeps, re-experiencing visions of the train bearing down and, the train whistle is sounding and the brakes are screeching and all of that. And so these things keep getting replayed as flashbacks, as nightmares, as intrusive thoughts, and so the way the process works is first I have the person establish a calm, safe place. So a place with no negative associations. It can be anywhere, but I have the person really imagine self to be there using the five senses as a way of really grounding and really having that peace and more importantly, that sense of safety. So once the person is in the calm, safe place, I then say, okay, pretend that I'm a reporter gathering the details of your story, of this traumatic incident. You're going to stay in the safe place and you're just going to give me the details, not like you're going back into the memory, but sort of like you're watching it on a screen far away. So you are detached. I don't want you having to go back and relive it. And I'm just writing down details. And if you find that you're going back into the memory and getting distressed, we'll pause and get you back to the safe place. So then, and this is really the hardest part of the process because they do often go back into the memory, but I just
Mhm.
bring it back out and have them go to the safe place. So I'm taking down notes. Then, with them continuing to be in the safe place, I retell the memory back to them, but I purposefully get all the details wrong. What happens is when we access the memory, that's like opening up the memory for the brain. And then when we are reprocessing the memory by me retelling it back to them, but getting everything wrong, and they have to correct me. So I might say, this happened at night. No, it was during the day. You were wearing blue pants. No, I was wearing sweatpants, and on and on and on. And it's that back and forth while the person continues staying in the safe place and feeling safe, feeling calm.
Oh,
It's that back and forth that forces the brain to relearn the memory, but it's associating it now with the calm, safe feeling. And that's what neutralizes the memory. So after we go back and forth and we reprocess the whole thing, then I check in with the client at the end and I say, how's that memory feel? And the person's like, oh, wow, I don't really feel anything. I mean, yeah, it happened. It was horrible. It was so scary, but then I was okay. Like I recovered and I'm okay. And they're surprised. They're sitting there
yeah.
telling me this and they are surprised. So I learned about this technique from a book called The Therapeutic Aha by Courtney Armstrong. I'm 97% sure that I got the name right. But the book is called The Therapeutic Aha. And of course, I don't have it right here, but it was a fascinating, fascinating book. And learning this technique has made a world of difference for my clients.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard of it before, but I've never heard it explained, so I didn't know how it worked. That's cool. That's it. See, there's another modality. There's another technique that can be used that talk therapy doesn't do. So, and I understand you have
Mm.
another new program coming up too that you've created. You wanna
I
share about
do.
that?
I'm so excited about this. Yeah, thank you. So, I have long been passionate about I mean, it's so much and it's so life-giving and life transforming to deal with the emotional and help people to achieve peace and freedom. But what about areas of life that emotions can really mess with and can cause ongoing issues like money?
Mhm.
And in my experience, people who are really struggling with their emotional system don't always manage money in the healthiest way. And so I teamed up with a money coach he's been working for years to help people get out of debt and to manage their finances better. And so he and I teamed up to come up with a course, to develop a course called Heal Your Money Stuff and Calm Your Life. What is this about? This is about the unpleasant intersection of emotional struggles and money management. So let's say that there are issues with impulsive spending or guilt ridden spending or spending because I need to buy things to feel better
Mhm.
or I am scared to work on a budget. I'll never have freedom or fun again if I work on a budget. Or, and this is an especially interesting reaction, I will not be told I will not be made to be put on a budget because let's say there's this experience from however many years ago
Mhm.
of being controlled. And so a budget is yet another way that somebody is trying to control me. Even if it's my budget and it's my choice, it's still this control, right?
Yep.
Like it sounds a little crazy, but I see this.
It's a trigger.
I see that. Yes, it is. And so that can be this rebellious reaction that the
Mhm.
person may not fully be aware of, but it's there. And so repeated money mismanagement is what
Mhm.
happens. And then, years of spinning the wheels and not really getting anywhere or maybe getting deeper into debt. And there's no shame, but hey, let's look at these things and let's see what's really going on so that we can help people to heal that stuff and have a calmer life, especially financially. And as we are aware, when we can get better control of the money and managing the money better, other things in life often will improve.
Absolutely, because I know that's true for me. Because I used to have a real fear about around money, and I know that it within the trauma arena, that it's not uncommon to have the financial problems, but I had a real fear, and I know exactly where mine came from. It came from my father, who had a real fear of money, and I had to work through that. I had to and I didn't realize how deep it went. Like things like, "Oh, I won't check my checking account," or, I had some money. I had a good chunk of money put away in a 401(k) that my late husband left me. I left it sitting there for 6 years before I did anything. I was so afraid to touch it. It was just, and it
Mm,
was like I could have had 6 years of investing that money, and, but it was just this, and it was right around then that I started working with actually like a kinda like a financial coach and kinda work through some of that. And then I'm very blessed I married a man who isn't afraid of money. He has a complete, I mean, he's my normal. He's so my normal, especially when it comes
mm,
to money, because he's just like, "I'll just go make more." Like, he doesn't have that connection like I do, like this deep fear. And so he's really helped me work through it. And then understanding more about money and understanding more about finances was huge too. Of course, I'm gonna be in fear of it. I don't understand it.
mhm.
So
Yeah,
I think that's beautiful. I'm so glad you're doing that. I think that's a wonderful thing. And of course, we're not taught how to take care of our finances either, right? Do they teach that in
right.
school?
Right.
We do need to be taught that. So
Yeah.
why don't you let our listeners know how they could reach you? This will all be in the show notes, but how they could reach out to you if they wanted to join this course or if they wanted to just talk to you, or I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So the website for the course and the money coach and I are putting together cohorts to personally lead people through the material. The website for all that is healmoneystuff.com.
I like that.
How about
Healmoneystuff.com.
that? Healmoneystuff.com. And as far as reaching out to me, I'll be happy to provide my email address, which is kind of a long one. So I'll just give it to you to put in the show notes.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds good. Well, and then I've got one last question. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
You're not crazy and you're not the worst.
Yeah.
Whatever you're dealing with, there is always a reason. Always. Okay? That reason is often fear based.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, because we're all designed to continue the species by avoiding dangerous things. It's just that when we are traumatized or we're dealing with a lot of emotional stuff, just about anything and everything can feel dangerous.
Yeah, so true.
So please know that you are not crazy, you're not the worst, you're not alone, and there are always reasons why we do and say what we do and say.
You literally took the words out of my mouth because I say that all the time. People act out for a reason. People don't just wake up one morning and decide they're going to act out. I mean, there's a reason why. Children and adults, we act out for a reason. Well, thank you, Jennifer. This has been really enlightening. It's been great, especially about the depression. That was so interesting, and I love how you explained that. And I that needs to be out there because that just it simplifies it, but gives such a clear understanding about depression because it is very misunderstood, and there are a lot of bullies out there when it comes to depression too. So,
Lisa, it's been great talking with you. This has been a blast and a half. And I want to thank you for having me on.
well, and thank you for all the work you're doing. I really appreciate it, and I know our listeners will too.